Good evening. This is Defacto Review, a weekly analysis of Mongolia's latest political, economic, and social issues by economist and columnist Mr. D.Jargalsaikhan.
Good evening.
And I'll be your host, Tikshirult. Today's topics are on the opening of the Chinggis Khaan Museum, the proposed budget for the 2023 fiscal year, and World Food Day, which is happening today. So for our first topic, we're going to discuss the opening of the Chinggis Khaan Museum. So on July 3rd, 2019, the Cabinet of Mongolia issued decree number 280 to construct the Chinggis Khaan Museum on the site of the former Natural History Museum in Ulaanbaatar. The museum, which displays over 2,000 years of Mongolian history and statehood, opened its doors this past week with the 9 White Banner ceremony. President Hurlsuk was among the many dignitaries that attended this event, and in his speech, he emphasized that Mongolians should study and preserve the deeds of the great Emperor Chinggis Khaan and to promote it and spread it across the world and not just Mongolia. What was the significance of this museum? Why was this museum built in the first place?
Well, during the socialist time, Mongolians even could not talk about Chinggis Khaan. It was ideologically prohibited because under the Chinggis Khaan, Mongolia was occupying large territory, including Russians, Chinese, North India, all the way to Great Mongolian Empire extended to covering Armenia, Georgia. So this grand past, grand history of a small nation was not the subject of love for big countries, in particular from Russia. When Mongolian politicians have celebrated 1,800 years of Chinggis Khan's birth, that person in the group was punished. And the man was sent outside of the Ulaanbaatar city for being nationalistic.
So that was 60 years ago, right?
Yes, 60 years ago. And for many Mongolians, it's a reliquary. It's so important for all Mongolians to know about. So this museum is kind of culmination of those respect, love, and pride of our history. So that's why the very museum was constructed very fast during 3 years. And they spent at the current rate, some 15, 16 million US dollar. It's a huge museum now. As you said, instead of National Museum, it was made on the site nearby, Sukbata Skue, not far from the State Palace. And it has, this is a result of many years' work, collections. There are total 12,000 cultural exhibits, and 92% are original exhibits. And the remaining is copies of replicas and displays with official permission and certificates initially located in the foreign museums, libraries, etc. Many from also archives. And there's from 14 countries, museum archives have extended. Their help also give us a copy of these original relics. So altogether, there is 9 big halls, a lot of things to watch inside of the museum. Museum contains Mongolia ancient states, it's Hunnu time, and then ancient nomadic states, Great Mongol state, Mongol Empire, Chinggis Khan origin, kings and nobles, beginning of 14th and 20th century. And during socialist time, they made sure that whoever is nobles from his time, all punished or somehow sent, and they had no chance to have education. Like many in Russia, nobles their children could not have access to education. So this kind of communist approach to the history. That's why it's so important.
So with all the importance that this museum presents to the Mongolian people, there were people on the other hand that were critical of building of this museum, because they tore down the Natural History Museum to build what some would say is an overly patriotic museum. Right? So, what do you think about that?
You see, the old museum building was completely run down, weared completely, and the walls even started to fail, break, crack. So that's one of the reasons why they need it. They could restore, like many other old buildings in Ulaanbaatar city, but it would be, they will show the facade of the building somehow original, but they need to reinforce whatever the main structure of the buildings, so they could be expensive. Though I should say, of course, we are missing the old museum, very nice site for the landscape of Ulaanbaatar city. But nevertheless, that's what has happened now. Now we have a brand new museum, which, by the way, have some educational facility for children to come. And many Mongolians outside of Mongolia to come to see what is exactly that person was, what was the history of Mongolians for the last 2,000 years, which is very important. I think the importance of the museum will be in the future, not now.
A lot of the officials during the talks, during the opening ceremonies, were noting that the museum was built in accordance with all safety regulations and international standards. So is the Chinggis Khaan Museum the first museum to meet these international requirements?
Yes, it is, and it's so important to meet that safety and all the regulations required for safety of people. Mm-hmm. And they have been traveling, visiting many places all around the world, and it's kind of the best reflection of the best ever museums built in other countries, somehow to smaller or bigger degree reflected here.
Let's move on to our second topic for this week. During the fall session of the State Great Torah, members of Parliament discussed the upcoming budget for the 2023 fiscal year and the projections for the next 2 years. The draft law for the budget is directed towards the following objectives: to implement legislation regarding state austerity, to intensify reforms in the budget financing system in health and education sectors aimed at the quality, performance, outcomes of public services, to introduce reforms in other sectors, and to improve the civil service salary system in line with productivity, and to implement debt management strategies optimally, to target social protection, to target groups within the framework of the policy from welfare to work, and enforce policies to decentralize by ensuring the balance of urban and rural developments, reduce traffic congestions, as well as to carry out tax policies for the creation of a favorable environment for investment, jobs, and businesses in rural areas. So what has gathered a lot of attention? Well, actually, could you give us some of the highlights of the budget? So what is different about the budget for next year?
As Mongolian economy grows, in spite of pandemic, COVID-19, and the year after the international situation now, the war in Ukraine, in spite of that, the economy has grown, and now the government finds the budget should be grown too. And this budget is the historically largest budget in the history of the country. This government expenses comes to the 20 trillion MNT, which is 38% of that upcoming GDP. It's a relatively large government, it shows, because the government is manageable and good if it is total budget expenses is around or less than 20%. Mongolians almost 40%. That's, I would say, one. And more than that, it has also deficit. And that deficit is at the level of 5% of GDP. More than this, expenses is large. Also, the estimation of revenue is large. But however, the deficit is still there, 1.5 trillion MNT, which is 2.8% of GDP. And once we had the law, not over 2%. By the way, the European countries have regulations. The budget deficit is to be under 2%. So that deficit is 2.8%. Though Mongolia had the bad experiences of amending the budget in the course of a year, 2 or even 3 times. So if it does not happen, then this budget is to end up in a year at this deficit. But still, that deficit means 1.5 trillion MNT means it's again government debt. And we have a lot of debt. We're already paying one of the highest debt country in the world now. That's one specific, and the GDP is going to be around, based on this budget, 53.6 trillion MNT. At the current US-Mongolia Tugriks exchange rate, it's around 16 billion USD economy. I mean, until now, we were around 10, 12, now 16 billion US dollar. If the rate was good, it could be even bigger, and the country could have per capita income more than 5 million USD, 5,000 USD per person. The other thing, why they made such an optimistic budget? You know, usually government always do optimistic. By the way, some other countries, even Russia, has 3 scenarios: optimistic, realistic, and pessimistic, because it's commodity-driven economy, and a lot depends. Mongolia depends on the price and on the price of coal and copper. And this time, again, they have taken a very optimistic view on that. They said that the price will not be changed. It's good now. It's a very good place now, a very good level now. Secondly, they also assume that, and it's planned actually, OT, underground mining, start to produce in the second half of the 2023. And that mine will make us number 4 largest copper mine in the world. And my reserve is even more. So the third optimistic approach was, we have this border points, logistics, very much having problem for the last 2 years, in particular on the border with China. So they think that this will not be happening again. And some foreign debt to be paid, but 200 million will be paid from the budget. That's the assumption of the government, and this is the basis of this budget. But however, there are some problems.
Well, you touched upon the optimism of the government in creating the budget for next year. So what has gathered a lot of attention is that 25% of the revenue for next year is projected to come from mineral exports. So if 25% is such a big number, so if there are issues within the borders, or the opening of the mine takes a long time, how badly could it impact the revenue projections for next year, the actual revenue that we bring in?
Well, hopefully, the actual revenue will happen as they plan, and particularly the OT, as I talked. We give a lot of hope for that. It will be on time. And by the way, out of all foreign debt, which is total 33 billion MNT for Mongolia, with 16 billion MNT, 2 and even more than 2 times higher. Out of this foreign debt, 11 is government debt, but 12 is the OT debt. OT had borrowed so much money to have this first-class technology mine at the depth of 1.5 kilometers. So it's a huge, as you can imagine, huge cost and a lot investment. And hopefully they will start to recover that investment. That's why they estimate that our export will be, for the first time, at the level of 11 billion US dollar. We had never such a big big export revenue. So hopefully this time happens. But what I'm worried about is every year they plan around 40 million tons coking coal to be exported to China, but actually it was almost 70% of it, or 50% even in some cases. But this time they say that because hopefully this pandemic is not coming back, hopefully the border issue is not, a logistic issue will not be there, so they again planning 36.5 million tons coal to be exported to China. If it is exactly happening with this amount, there is a great hope that we will fulfill this budget. The other thing the government's saying is now they're following Singapore and Chile and Norway example. They will have the wealth fund, and this wealth fund will be based on what is we have now, Irtnis Mongolia. It's a kind of conglomerate, mining conglomerate of state-owned companies that own so-called strategic deposits in the country, and thus making the government is the largest business in the country.
So how optimistic are you for the next year with how the economy is going right now?
My concern is the exchange rate of MNT and Turik. All around the world, we have inflation problem and energy problem. And the Mongolia is the same. We're now currently around 13% level inflation. And the Mongol Bank is saying that it will be on the 6% next year, in spite of the increasing the policy rate to 12.5%, 12%. Yet, Mongol Bank is running very much budgetary programs like this mortgage. Not because Mongol Bank wants or likes it, just because government, in spite of their promises for last maybe almost 10 years, they never take this budgetary issue of housing problem to the government balance. So that's why Mongol Bank has to stay there. And plus, the mortgage rate in the country is only 8%. Government 3%. Actually, in 8%, the banks add their program. As a result, you see, housing in Mongolia, okay, half of the products made in Mongolia. Cement, say, even some other materials, but another half, mostly what is inside furniture, and all this are bought from abroad with US dollar. That is increasing the rate. And that's why, to have more stable exchange rate, Mongol Bank is spending a lot of money from the currency reserve, which was a year before around billion, now only 2. So Mongol Bank is spending a lot money for that. So it shows how fiscal and monetary policy are coherent. If they talk about different things, which they are today. So with a lot concern remaining about the possible change of the currency rate. That's my worry. Yeah. And first of all, here also, we spend a lot of money for 1.6 billion out of this 1.6 billion MNT, US dollar we will spend for buying food from Russia still. So now the government also talk about possible trading with Russia with rubles, not US dollar. So let's see. There are a lot things we are not very much know, but we assume that it will be more or less manageable.
Let's hope it is that way. And let's move on to our third topic for this week, which is the World Food Day that's happening today. Today is World Food Day, an international day celebrated every year worldwide on this day to commemorate the date of the founding of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization in 1945. Mr. Vinod Ahuja, the Food and Agriculture Organization representative to Mongolia, gave his insight on the issue of food in Mongolia. he highlighted challenges that we're facing as a country posed by pandemic, conflicts, and natural disasters, and noted that the challenges have been more severe for the countries that significantly depend on global markets for meeting food security needs, such as Mongolia, because we import a lot of food, vegetables, things like that. He also highlighted certain issues such as how 55% of Mongolians are overweight, with 20% suffering from obesity, how at 30% or 32% Mongolia has the second highest levels of premature mortality among low-middle income countries, and how an estimated 1 in 4 Mongolians experience moderate or severe food insecurity. So with all these issues that we're facing as a country, what steps should be done to eradicate or simply reduce these issues in the future?
You see, this World Food Day is celebrated since 1979, on the day when FAO was founded. And every year on this day, each country focuses on food-related issues. And many countries now, still we have a lot of people in hunger. Some 800 people now, million people now still undernourished. And it is 150 million more than a year before COVID-19. So the situation in the world in terms of food is very severe. In case of Mongolia, we talk about the undernourished. Still, in terms of poverty, Mongolia, about 27.5% people are poor, regarded by the World Bank statistics. That means a day less than $2 per person is spent. Then it's poor. The other thing is you have just mentioned about 52% of Mongolians being overweighted, which was never before. Now with this change in free market, access to all goods, many imported goods, the people eat not always the right food. And also this FAO in Mongolia says that 50% of Mongolians cannot buy the food they want to eat. So under these circumstances, we need to focus everybody's attention to, for example, waste of food. It turned out 30% of food in Mongolia wasted.
30%?
30%. Oh, wow. 36% in Ulaanbaatar city. And the estimation is, altogether how much food goes through away. Either it's just like you're taking something that you don't like, or overtaking it, etc. Whatever this case is, it's very high. So whole society is to pay attention to that. We should eat only things, prepare or take only things that you would like to eat, not everything. And as a result, we are wasting. One. Secondly, about the education of population about right food. And in per capita, per ration of food, we use a lot of sugar and a lot the foods, we call it junk foods. So, and we need to pay really serious attention to the education on. And it's a good. This morning I was also on the UN Food Day celebration in Mongolia, and they have celebrated 4 hero women who had really changed it with national local food, really the food supply of the particular product. So I think altogether we need to pay a lot of attention in the food days. The other thing is Food Safety Day. It's in June every year, World Bank is celebrating that Food Safety Day, which is also a point of attention in Mongolia. We getting people, the statistics is not going down well. People contaminated, poisoned from the contaminated food, for example. It's a food safety issue. And food, it says that Mongolia is missing national food control system and food safety standard enforcement are very weak in Mongolia, in particular this enforcement. So it shows, again, it reminds this day, again, reminds us to pay attention to this food security control, food security, food safety, the enforcement power of the government.
Speaking of the government, you touched upon the lack of education when it comes to food. And so people aren't eating right because they don't know what is right. So there have been issues, or there have been examples such as the sugar ban in the United Kingdom. So what they would do is they would put a tax, or the sugar tax, they'd put a tax on, beverages or snacks that have contained an excessive amount of sugars. Do you think taking measures like that would help this education issue?
It's on one side. On the other side, it's a role of parents. In Germany, for example, they almost never give any sugar content food to children. Mm-hmm. And it's always a problem because the children like sugar content. So, but still, they give that education. The parents are the key stakeholder to play here in better role. Mm-hmm. Of course, schools and other society in general.
Mm-hmm. Let's hope that this education issue and also what you've touched on, the food safety, food security,
control,
and even obesity. All of these we can hope to tackle in the near future.
I think it's a lifestyle issue, and the more people now getting health conscious, and the more people are now going to gyms, etc. And I think the situation will be changing. We must change it. Yes.
That is all for this week. This has been Defacto Review, a weekly analysis of Mongolia's latest political, economic, and social issues by economist and columnist Mr. D.Jargalsaikhan.
Thank you very much for watching us and staying with us. And we do this program every week, Sunday night. And watch also, you can do it on our social media, jargaldefacto.com. Thank you.